Thank you so much for coming, everyone. I really appreciate that you came to support both me as well as all of our local authors here in Saskatchewan. First, I want to thank Jane for inviting me to be part of Saskatchewan Book Week. It's exciting to be part of an event that promotes local writers and again connects us with both people as well as organizations that support all of us here that are writing in Saskatchewan. I want to thank the Warman Library for also hosting us tonight. This is a fantastic facility. Thank you for having us. And yeah, so again, thanks for coming. As you know, my name is Jennifer Jacoby-Smith. I grew up in a small town in Wilkie, which is just south of North Battleford. I fell in love with the written word while I was there. I grew up with a single mom who was a hairdresser. And I knew her clients that would read me a book, so I would stand in the corner with my book clutched and wait till the right client came in. And then when they went under the dryer, I would climb on their lap and shove a book in their face and say, read me a story. So that became my obsession, was stories and the written word, really. I turned that obsession into a career in my 20s. I was at home with 2 young kids, and I knew we needed a second income. So I put my brain to work, I did some research and found out, hey, I have some writing skills. I can do some freelance writing. So I found some niche places to write, niche websites like mom blogs and newspapers that were local that I could do some writing for. And then I talked my way into an internship with the Saskatoon Star Phoenix in the Arts and Entertainment Department. And that particular job became life-changing. And after the internship wrapped up, I moved on to radio, and I wrote radio commercials for a few years. After writing radio commercials, I found my way back to the Star Phoenix, but this time in the advertising department. There I have been creating custom content for corporations and organizations, not just in Saskatchewan, but all across the country. But recently, I decided it was time to tell some stories of my own. And actually, my job at the Star Phoenix and working with corporate clients is what led me to write A Fondness for the Reckless. So, as you remember, during COVID, everybody was baking bread or dancing or doing the latest online challenge, whatever it was. I decided I was going to go back to my first love, which was writing. Writing fiction, specifically. So I decided I would write a book, and I would write 1,000 words a day until I had a book or I had something. So after you do that for a while, you start to run out of ideas. It takes about a week before you really mine most of the normal things you write about, and they're all gone, and then you have to come up with something new. So what was fresh in my brain was the last project I worked on with the Star Phoenix before COVID hit. And I don't know if you remember, but the Junos were supposed to be hosted in Saskatoon on March 15th, 2020. And my colleague and I, Jeannie Armstrong, worked on the print guide. Remember the actual print guide that goes in the newspaper? And we worked on that for the Junos. It was a massive project. We had so many things to coordinate. And between the two of us, it looked amazing and wonderful, but it was a lot of work. We were very proud of it. No one ever saw it because, of course, as you all know, 2 days before the Junos, it was canceled. As a gift, the Juno Committee had given us tickets to both the Junos as well as many of the other events that were taking place that week, and unfortunately we could go to none of them. So that experience, that disappointment, that big, huge achievement, and then the crushing disappointment afterwards was just fresh in my brain, so I thought, well, I'm going to write about the Canadian music industry because it's my other obsession. So that's how A Fondness for the Reckless came to be. I decided that if I was going to write a story that I wanted to read, which is one of the common things that you will hear as advice for young writers, is to write a story that you would want to read, because if you want to read it, then generally speaking, your readers are going to want to read it. So I came up with 10 Past Midnight, who are a fictional boy band, who are made up of 5 guys from across Canada from different backgrounds, and how they make it work as a band. So they are right now on the cusp of either great stardom, or they are about to break apart and walk away. So that's where we come at the beginning of the book. So that's the introduction to me and the introduction to A Fondness for the Reckless. So I should mention that the book takes place in 2016. So some of what I'm going to read are flashbacks to things that happened before that. So I will preface that so you don't get too confused. It's easier to get when you're seeing it in print, but anyway. Crap, crap, crap. Indy pulled his suitcase towards Terminal 3 and tried not to scowl at the throngs of people everywhere. It was going to take an eternity to get through security, judging by the lineups. His phone vibrated in his pocket out of his well-worn black hoodie. More text messages from Jaxson, Indy assumed, taking out his phone as he positioned himself in the check-in line. 11 messages. Fewer than he'd expected. Another came in while he was reading through them. Where the F are you? The interview is at 1. Are you coming or not? Indy took a breath. Everything felt out of tune. The melody he'd been humming that morning as he dressed now screeched loudly in his head, stilted and off-key. Change was like that, a jangly mess of discordant tones and volumes. It would be a while before he was able to hear anything resembling harmony in his head again. But as much as he hated the mental chaos, not to mention upsetting his best friend and bandmate, he'd made his decision. Months of infighting and yesterday's huge blow-up made the offer in California even more attractive. It felt like destiny had offered him a way out, a way to mute the frustrations. But now he had to face the fallout. He pulled his hoodie over his bleached hair and hoped none of his fellow travelers would recognize him as a founding member of the popular boy band 10 Past Midnight. Still in 2016, now we are at Red Tree Lounge. Activity buzzed around Jamie Paul as she stood in the employee lounge of Red Tree Records, a boutique music label in Toronto's East End. It's just another interview, she whispered to herself again. But no matter how many times she said it, she knew it wasn't. She pressed her lips together, mindful of not messing up her makeup. She took another deep breath and hoped the rest of the team wouldn't notice. She'd done hundreds of interviews, but never with this much riding on it. Nervous? A young man in an ill-fitting suit touched her elbow. He was an intern, but Jamie couldn't remember his name. Dan, maybe? No, she said, followed by a quick yes. The intern, possibly named Dan, looked genuinely concerned as he handed her a bottle of water. You'll be great. I'm told these guys are super charming. Jamie took a chance. Thanks, Dan. The young intern nodded. She'd been right. Maybe that was a good omen. Jamie took the water and opened it. She swallowed a cool mouthful, hoping it would calm her nerves. Dan smiled. This is exciting. It's my first major interview. That was not a good omen. She needed everyone sharp, ready, and on top of their game. The last thing she needed was a fresh young intern too star-trekked to do his job. She handed the bottle back to him forcefully and took another deep breath. I'll go check and see if they're here, Dan said. As the youngest person in the history of CBN to be promoted to senior entertainment reporter, Jamie Paul had been looking for a juicy story to prove she was worthy of her new position. Dan was congenial, but the rest of her colleagues were whispering about how she'd gotten the job, questioning her abilities. In her first few weeks at the station, she set out to prove that all those billboards with her smiling face around downtown Toronto, they weren't a mistake. And the best opportunity had come from a tip that had snagged her the interview of the year. 10 Past Midnight, the boy band sensation everyone wanted to talk to. They agreed to do their first sit-down interview ever with her. A long-form interview with the media-shy musical talents would prove her journalistic chops. The interview would lead CBN's Sunday Night News magazine and would prove definitively that she belonged at the anchor desk of the network's newly minted nightly entertainment program. Truthfully, no one knew what to expect from these darlings of the Canadian music industry. A year on the charts meant that they were no strangers to attention and screaming fans, but the budding superstars had yet to sit down for a tell-all interview. The industry hummed with speculation. Did some of the group members have a reason for avoiding media scrutiny? Everyone was waiting for them to break their silence. One of the members, Indy, had proven to be a bit volatile. The previous month, he'd stormed out of a one-on-one radio interview when the DJ asked who he was dating. Now, various members of the 10 Past Midnight group had been linked to high-profile celebrities, Indy included. A designer from the Home Improvement Network was said to be his latest conquest. Indy's on-air outburst had included several expletives. The tirade and accompanying viral video had fan groups abuzz. Haters could come out of the woodwork, calling the group entitled, and difficult. Some had gone so far as to imply that certain band members were gay or bisexual, and that was why they didn't want to talk about their love lives. Fans and forums defended Indy's reaction, but the band's reputation had taken a hit. No longer the likable Canadian kids, they'd been labeled as arrogant divas, led by a surly hothead named Indy. Even Ian, her normally supportive producer, had raised an eyebrow when she pitched this interview. Are you sure you're ready? Like, this is the big time. It'll cause a media storm no matter what happens. These guys need a public relation win, Jamie had pointed out. Rumor has it they're renegotiating their contract with Red Tree right now after some serious infighting. They need to look empathetic and understanding. They'll be on their best behavior. It's in their best interest to be charming and ingratiating. Trust me. Ian was unconvinced. He was part of the generation of journalists who looked for a good story and paid minimal attention to online clicks. But Jamie knew the network needed some splashy content to justify the money they'd spent creating their new entertainment program. With newsroom budgets cut to the very bone, relationships with celebrities drove broadcast revenue. It was no secret. Jamie went on, what's the worst that could happen? Indy storms out again? We'll have video and everyone will tune in to see what he says. Jamie, if this blows up, what we'll have is Red Tree's lawyers swarming our offices for weeks, Ian cautioned. We're an entertainment news program, not a gossip blog. We're journalists, not publicists. It was a mild rebuke, and Jamie was undeterred. We need a timely, high-profile story to kick things off. Who's more high-profile than 10 past midnight right now? Ian sighed. Just be careful. Now he was standing in the corner of the lounge, away from the lights and activity, arms crossed, giving her that quizzical look. Had she forgotten something? Jamie took another look at the setup. The band had insisted the interview be filmed at their offices of their label, Red Tree, whose major claim to fame was finding and launching 10 past midnight. The neighborhood surrounding Red Tree's campus made it seem like a much older, established company, but Jamie knew the fledgling label had nearly declared bankruptcy shortly after signing 10 past midnight. They were hungry to prove their pride and joy, their creative investment was worth all the attentions and accolades they'd already accumulated. The employee lounge was on the second floor, right across the hall from a dance studio and a practice space. Windows along one wall revealed a frameable view of Riverdale Park East. The room itself was decorated in soft neutrals, with overstuffed couches surrounded by two 60-inch televisions and gaming consoles. She rolled her eyes. It looked like a kid's playground, not the studio of an adult music group. The lounge also boasted a ping pong table, which had been moved to make room for all the broadcast equipment. A small ivory couch had been appropriated from another room. 3 small stools stood behind it, and in front was another stool from which Jamie would ask her questions. Cables for lighting snaked along the carpeted floor, and the windows had been shaded so the natural light didn't overwhelm the space. The sound engineer was ready with mic packs. Each member of the band would be greeted and then offered a drink. Bottled water stood on a nearby table. Then they would be fitted with a mic. Everything had been choreographed as carefully as one of 10 past midnight's music videos. Jamie, they're here, Dan said, lighting up like a kid at Christmas. Jamie gave him a clipped thanks. She stood, smoothed her gray slacks, apple green sweater, shooting a questioning look at the camera operator. He responded with a quick thumbs up. They were already rolling on handhelds anyway, hoping to get some B-roll of the band arriving, casual and relaxed. She glanced at Ian. He nodded. Jamie took a deep breath and once again told herself it was a simple interview, just like all the others she'd done in her career. She was prepared. The worst that could happen was Indy walk out, and she already had a plan for that. 10 past midnight entered the lounge like a gym of high school students. The din reached her before the door even opened. Jamie knew each of the band members on site. She'd spent 3 weeks studying photos and reading bios posted by their label. Jaxson entered first, the eager look on his face framed by pastel pink hair. The band had been his idea, his and Indy's, but behind his smile, Jamie thought she detected a hint of worry. Will and Mac were joking with each other, followed by Bear, who nudged them like an anxious parent to get them to stop giggling. Hi, I'm Jamie Paul with CBN, she greeted them, extending her hand to Jaxson. She'd been warned about his pale blue eyes. The remarkable color disarmed many upon first meeting. His black bomber jacket, white dress shirt, and tie gave him a serious look despite the bubblegum hair. "Jamie, pleasure to meet you. I'm Jaxson," he replied, professional and smooth. "And this," he gestured to the rest of the group, "is 10 past midnight." They all smiled and gave her a small wave. She took Mac's hand next. The youngest, at 18, he seemed intimidated by the lights, the cameras, and the half-dozen crew members hanging out. "Mac," he said, barely meeting her eyes. He looked like he had just come from school. Sneakers, ripped black jeans, a patterned red and white cardigan over a white dress shirt and tie. "And I'm Bear." The next member introduced himself with a slight Quebecois accent. Bear's shoulder-length wavy hair and warm hazel eyes endeared him to fans of all ages. Everything about him held a relaxed ease that made him impossible not to like. He wore a distressed black leather jacket over a faded green V-neck, jeans, and even a newsboy cap. "Nice to meet you." "Jamie Paul," she replied with a smile. Bear was even better looking in person. Will came next. His clothes were the most dramatic, a black and white jacket over a burgundy dress shirt. The second youngest, his jet black hair was dyed a deep blue and carefully styled off his face. With piercing green eyes and angular cheekbones, it was easy to see why he'd gotten his start in modeling. Jamie couldn't help but stare. If nothing else, 10 past midnight might be the most attractive collection of men in the industry. Jamie didn't recognize the next one in line. He seemed to be in his 30s. He wore a suit jacket over a pair of dark jeans and a ball cap. He introduced himself. "Hi, Jamie. My name is Casey Reynolds. I'm the manager of these goofs." He smiled. The young woman beside him introduced herself as a publicist, but Jamie didn't catch her name. "Hello." Jamie was perplexed. She thought the band would come on their own. The group chatted with the crew as they grabbed the offered water. Then Dan said the last thing she expected. "Indy's missing." "Missing?" She could hear the note of panic in her voice. "Just running a little late," Casey said, offering a small shrug. The publicist jumped in with a quick explanation, something about traffic and scheduling. Jamie didn't hear it, though. She couldn't do the interview with only 4 members of the band. Her eyes flashed to Ian's, and he raised that eyebrow. Jamie had been badly mistaken. Indy storming out wasn't the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen was Indy not showing up at all. That's the end of chapter 1. This next chapter is going to be a lot of flipping back and forth. In the first chapter, you got to meet all the members of the band. In this chapter, you're going to get a deeper look into Indy a little bit. So I'll try to tell you when we're flipping back and forth between time here. Okay. 2016, Pearson International Airport. "Traveling alone, sir?" the airline employee asked. It took Indy a moment to reply. Yeah. For the first time in a long time, he was traveling alone. When was the last time he'd taken a flight by himself? He had crisscrossed the country with 10 past midnight for the last year, but he hadn't taken any personal trips, other than a few days he'd spent in Vancouver last month. Of course, the first time he'd arrived at Pearson 7 years earlier, he'd been traveling alone too. A sullen, angry teenager, displaced from his home in Saskatoon after the death of his maternal grandmother, and sent to live with his other grandmother, whom he'd never met, in Toronto. That was a very different kind of alone. Back to 2009, John G. Diefenbaker International Airport. "Name?" the security agent asked. "Excuse me, young man?" Indy shook his head. He'd spaced out again. It had been happening a lot since his grandmother died. He wondered if there was something wrong with him. "What's your name?" The voice came again. Indigo Lee. "Are you traveling on your own?" Indy glanced around the airport security area and wondered why the answer wasn't self-evident. "Yes, I'm alone." The security area at the John G. Diefenbaker International Airport in Saskatoon was nearly devoid of people. The early morning flight to Toronto was the only one leaving for hours. The 5 a.m. departure meant Indy had had very little sleep, not an unusual occurrence. He'd arrived at the airport with a bleary-eyed social worker. The social worker, a dedicated and caring young woman named Julie, had walked him up to the security check-in and then said her goodbyes. "You'll be okay from here," she told him with a sweet smile that had more than a little pity. "I think you'll do well in Toronto, Indigo. Your dad's mother's sounds like a lovely person. and she's so excited to meet you. I know this is all new and scary, but promise me you'll give her a chance anyway, okay? She tried to hug him, but he stepped away. Right. No hugging, Julie said. She'd given him one more sympathetic look, the same one the security checkpoint person was currently giving him, and left. Indy was so sick of everyone's pity. Everyone was so sad for him, they said. Everyone was sad that his grandmother had died and orphaned him once more, just like his parents had when he was young. Indy wasn't sad. He felt little grief at Magda's death. She'd been a cold and bitter woman. Neither she nor Leo, her late husband, deserved the title of grandparent. He had always referred to them by name. No, he wasn't grieving Magda's death. He was pissed about moving halfway across the country to live with a stranger in a strange city. He didn't understand why he couldn't stay in Saskatoon. Surely there had to be a foster family he could live with. But Julie had been keen on finding him a family placement, which meant hunting down his dad's long-lost relatives in Ontario. Good news, Indy. Julie had gushed just the week before. I found your grandmother. Rose Lee. Her husband, your grandfather, died several years ago. He was an oncologist. From what Rose has told me, I'm so happy you'll be able to go live with her. Indy had snorted at the possibility, but no matter how much he protested, Julie had been adamant. Now he stood in the middle of the Saskatoon airport with all his earthly belongings being x-rayed in gray plastic bins while he waited. Empty your pockets, another security guard said, giving Indy a tray. Indy pulled out the iPod he'd pilfered from the social worker when he got out of the car. It was an older unit. She'd mentioned that her boyfriend had gotten her a new one for her birthday. Indy figured she didn't need two. It wasn't the first time he'd taken something that wasn't his. Of course, Leo would have beaten him if Indy had come home with something he shouldn't. But he'd gotten good at grabbing a stray loony or two from his classmates now and then. And now, he had a shiny new iPod. He wondered what music Julie had on the device. The security agent handed Indy's boarding pass back to him after inspecting it and sent him through the security line and then pointed him to the gate where he would wait for his flight. Indy climbed the flight of stairs, found the right gate. He was the only one there. He had an hour before his flight, one more hour in the city he'd been born and raised in. One more hour until he said goodbye to everything he knew and started a new life somewhere else. He'd given Julie the full brunt of his anger when she'd announced she'd booked him a flight. You don't even know her, he'd shouted. Why would you send me halfway across the country to someone you don't even know? Hell, I don't even know her. Julie had sighed. Rose has had 2 home visits from social services in Ontario. I've had multiple interviews with her. She's a lovely person. I've moved foster families. I've moved schools. So what not? I'll move across the country too. Hey, Julie stopped his rant. If you hadn't run away from the first 2 foster families, it wouldn't have moved you at all. This is your last chance, Indy. But why can't I just stay living here on my own? You know that's not possible. Julie shook her head in frustration. You're 14. Indy fumed silently. He'd taken care of Magda for the past year as her health steadily deteriorated. Who did they think did all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry? It's going to be fine, Indy. Julie sighed again. You'll make new friends. You'll have a new start at school. And you'll have your grandmother. Her voice held sympathy. Great. I know it's a lot of new things to throw at you, but I'll make sure your social worker there checks in on you regularly. Indy didn't really want to leave Saskatoon, but the idea of moving to Toronto, that was worse. It sounded awful. Everything he'd ever read or seen about the city made it sound crowded, loud, and obnoxious, filled with people who thought it was the center of the universe. So I don't get a choice? Indy, there's no other option. Rose is over the moon that you're coming. She's planning trips, outings, even shopping trips for your room and school supplies as we speak. Her daughter, your aunt, will be there when you get settled. What if I hate it? Julie gave him an encouraging smile. As I said, your social worker will be there to smooth out any problems. Indy said nothing. He couldn't wait to be old enough until adults couldn't tell him what to do anymore. Look, the social worker said, no one likes change. But give it time. You might even come to love the city and your grandmother. I know it. Julie gave him her full-on sunshine grin. She was determined to drag him into liking this whole idea. He'd given up arguing with her. As he waited to board the plane to his new life, she told him he would love. He slipped the pristine white earbuds from her iPod into his ears and began to scroll through her songs. He lay across several seats and waited for his last prairie sunrise. Now we're back to 2016, Pearson International Airport. Bags checked, Indy moved through Pearson to find the line for security. Julie had been right about his new home, though the adjustment to living in Toronto had been anything but smooth. The first few days he'd spent with Rose, he barely spoke. He hated the house. It smelled like it was full of old-fashioned furnishings, and it smelled weird, like fish. Rose cooked all her favorite Korean dishes to impress him, most of which contained ingredients he'd never heard of, let alone tasted. The first time he'd had kimchi, he thought his mouth was on fire. Rose was amused. Now Indy could barely go a week without visiting some of his favorite Korean restaurants in the city, or driving out to his aunt's house in Kitchener to taste some of Rose's dishes in person, like his favorite, kimchi fried rice. He'd give almost anything to stand in Rose's old house again, to be embraced by its fragrant, cozy interior. Then, we're back in 2009. Someone tapped his shoulder. He opened his eyes to the bright smile of a beautiful young woman in a flight attendant's uniform. Her dark hair had been precisely styled into a perfect bun at the nape of her neck. "Hi, are you Indigo?" Indy pulled out his earbuds. "I'm Maria, come with me." She led him to the gate and scanned his boarding pass. Then she walked him down the sloped hallway to the airplane, its engines already humming. "Have you ever flown before, Indigo?" "No." Indy gripped the straps on his backpack as he followed her. Indy took him to his seat at the back of the plane. When miners fly, the airline likes to keep them close to the flight crew, so you'll be here. You're the only one on board this time, so you get to choose, window or aisle. Indy said nothing but shuffled over to the window seat, holding his backpack awkwardly in front of him. "I can stow that in the overhead compartment for you, or you can put it under the seat in front of you." Indy shoved the backpack under the seat and then looked at the flight attendant. "That's right, good job." Indy clenched his jaw. He hated when adults infantilized teenagers. He was 14, not 4. "Have you ever been to Toronto?" Indy closed his eyes. "No." "I have a note here that says your grandmother will be meeting us. Are you excited to see her?" Indy shrugged. "Never met her." "Oh, wow." Her eyes were wide. "Then this is a special trip. How long are you staying with her?" "I'm not coming back." Indy shook his head. This was all horribly complicated to explain to a complete stranger. He wished she'd stop talking. He turned his gaze out the window to the gray dawn leaking over the horizon. "I see," she said as she helped a couple of nearby passengers stow their carry-on bags. "Still, it must be exciting to start a new adventure. Toronto is an exciting place." 30 minutes later, the plane lifted off the ground and he watched his prairie hometown slowly shrink in the window. Indigo stared at all the lights forming a grid. The haphazard arrangement of streets seemed neat and tidy from above. This new perspective of the city he had known his whole life was fascinating. Everything was about to change, and Indy couldn't escape the feeling that he was precariously suspended between then and now. That's it. Well, first of all, I have hung around on some fairly shady places on the internet that most people who are my age wouldn't want to be. Yeah, there's a lot of forums that you can go to just to lurk and get some information. To get the idea of the vibe of Toronto, I stayed in Toronto for a whole month in 2022. And we called it the concert tour because we went to so many concerts while we were there. And I did actually get to go to the Junos while I was in Toronto. Yeah, so that was part of it. Lots of reading, young adult fiction. Yeah, lots of reading. I didn't quite go the video game side of things. It's not quite my style, but yeah. My obsession. I listen to a lot of Canadian music. I won't say 100% Canadian music, but when I was writing this, it was mostly Canadian music. And I sifted through every genre you can think of or name. I pretty much listened to somebody in it. And I would take deep dives into artists I had never heard of but were Canadian. And some I was pleasantly surprised that I'd already listened to them. I just didn't realize they were Canadian. So yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. I do actually have a playlist if you want to check it out. You can go to Apple Music and search for my name, and there's a playlist. It's called Indie's Official Playlist. And there's also a link in the back of the book to the YouTube playlist that's got all of the songs on it as well. So, and I will say that the YouTube playlist is about 95% Canadian. There's a few American artists in there and a few, let's just say, non-American artists, like a couple Korean songs and a couple European DJs and stuff. So, yeah. Who would play, this is, I am embarrassed to admit how much I've thought of this. Michaela, our youngest, and I have sat and discussed this, who would think, and it would be really hard. If I had to choose, this is going to sound so out there, but Suga from BTS, he would be a really good indie. I would also say, although he's from, I believe it is Taiwan, Henry, also a K-pop artist, he'd be really cool. I mean, he's just ridiculously talented anyway. So, and then there is also another K-pop artist called Kim Sung-kyu, who I absolutely adore, and I think he would make a good indie. And he also does some acting, so he has the skills at least. Yeah, I'll send them a copy and be like, here. You have nothing else to do, I'm sure. So I did a lot of, when I was writing 1,000 words a day, a lot of that was just clearing my throat and figuring out how to establish a practice of writing every day. And then eventually I hit upon the idea. I originally wrote a different story that involved 10 past midnight, and I could not get the timeline to really work. And so, again, though, when you've committed to 1,000 words a day, you've got to write something. So I decided if I'm going to write something, I'm going to keep with these characters. So I did a lot of writing where these characters started interviewing each other, and a lot of different backstory interviews where they were talking about how they came to be a band. And then I was like, well, that's the story. That's the most interesting part. And so then once I structured it like that, it started falling into place. So it took me probably 2 years to write it, so at least. And then editing, and then getting it published and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I think there's got to be the book itself is almost 100,000 words, and I would say I probably have at least another 100,000 or more on my hard drive that is not related at all to this story, but is that same group of characters. Just little spin-offs here and there. But it was a great way to get to know the characters, like I say, and understand what they would do when they walked into a certain situation. So yeah. We can. Yeah. I am incredibly proud of this cover. I had nothing to do with it, except that they asked me what I would like for a cover, so I actually went into the bookstore and I looked at a bunch of young adult fiction books, and I took pictures of the ones I liked, the ones that really popped for me, the ones that I was like, this most reflects of what I would like it to look like. And then my publisher, Heather at Your Nicholsworth Publishing, she has relationships with some artists, and one of them is in Toronto, who was originally from Regina, which I thought was a fantastic little tie-in, and she designed this. So she gave us a bunch of sketches to look at, but this was the only one that she did from this angle, and I immediately was like, that's India, I love it. And then as soon as she sent me the colors, I think the drawings, I think I sent around to a bunch of people to say, hey, what do you think of this? But the colors, I picked those. I was like instantly like, this is the one. This is, yeah. I love how she kind of has that little rebellious glint in his eye or something. I don't know. I feel like it's there a bit. So yeah. I love this so much, I'm going to put it up on my wall at some point. Get it printed out. Thank you.